Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Landcare Farming webinar this afternoon. For those newbies, the Landcare Farming program, it's a federally funded program. It's a joint program between National Landcare Network and Landcare Australia. Our core objective in the Landcare Farming program is to drive on-farm awareness, adoption of the latest agricultural research, and demonstrate and promote the exceptional stewardship stories that come from our Australian farmers and producers. To this end, the Landcare Farming program has developed a set of national best practice management themes and principles to ensure that the actions and activities are available to match with the tools and the support that farmers need to make sure they're on the right track, and then in turn promote those stories to showcase the really good work that's happening in Australian farming today. The themes that we've got that actually drive production, productive and profitable landscapes, as well as environmental outcomes, are very important to make sure that they're consistent and they're understood at the farm level, to make sure that we have healthy soil, clean and reliable water source, and improve the biodiversity of the landscape. Now, the six themes that tie Landcare farming to the landscape are vegetation management, ground cover, biodiversity, carbon flows, drought resilience, and the person's performance. Now, one of the things I'm asked a lot about is saying, well, there's no water in that. Why isn't water in it? Well, every single one of those things impact the quality of water. So what we're doing over the next 12 months is we're running a series of webinars with leaders in their fields, some of the best researchers, some of the best projects, some award winners, and talking about how their on-farm practices, their experiences and their story adjust the landscape, the farming, the management that they do on farm to create those soil, water and biodiversity outcomes. Today, we've had a little bit of a speed bump. We initially had promoted that we had the Landcare Award nominees today, but about 5 minutes before the webinar launched, we've had to diverge. 2 of our 3 couldn't turn up, and that's farming, folks. The way things happen, they happen fast and they're unexpected. And when it comes down to animal welfare and the landscape and managing your business, obviously that's much more important than having a chat to me this afternoon. Fortunately, we did have someone turn up, and unfortunately for me, it's the guy who won the 2020 Bob Hawke Award, Mr. Andrew Stewart. So Andrew is online. What we're going to do today is have a bit of a run through what he's doing and what made him stand out of those 130 applicants we received for the Bob Hawke Award, and talk to him about the mindset and the practices and the things that he's done over the last few decades to get to this place today. He's an interesting guy. He's got lots and lots to talk about. Got some amazing stories to tell about where he is today and what he's done on farm. So we're going to have a format where we sort of have a chat. Andrew's going to run through his a PowerPoint presentation, and then once we get to the end of that, there's an opportunity to ask questions and talk about what he's doing. Now, before I introduce Andrew, I'd like to offer a spoken commitment to the reconciliation, and especially today, talking from around Australia about landscape health and community resilience and its long-term sustainability. I'd like to offer acknowledgement of country. So whether you've joined today from Western Australia or the Northern Territory, from Melbourne, Tasmania, I'd just like you to take a moment and reflect on and acknowledge the traditional owners of the country where you're sitting today. Today I'm speaking on Gubbi country up in southeast Queensland, and I pay my respects to your elders, past, present and emerging, and I recognise that you as traditional owners and the continuing connection to this land, its water and the culture. Thank you. Okay, so let's get cracking. Today, as I mentioned, we're speaking with the Bob Hawke winner for 2020. The Bob Hawke Award's been going for quite a few years now. It's probably the pinnacle of the Landcare Award, pulls out the best producers, the ones that are doing innovative and new things and building the soil, water and biodiversity resilience on their property. Not only that, they're sharing it with others and they're showcasing it for the betterment of their industry and their network and their community. Today, I'd like to introduce Andrew Stewart from down in Deans Marsh in Victoria. Andrew, as I said, was picked out of 130 nominees for this award and has achieved carbon neutrality on his grazing property. We're going to have a chat to him about that today. If you've got questions, it's a good time to have we've basically got a leader of the industry in our glove box for the next 40 minutes to an hour. And this is a great opportunity to ask those questions about the how, the where, the why, and the what. And so very simple format today. Andrew will run through his presentation. Type your questions into me. Now, to submit a question into the chat box today, if you're signed in on Landcarer, the Landcare platform, you just type the question at the text box on the bottom of the webinar screen. And if you have any technical issues while you're trying to listen and you're signed into Landcare also, there's a little green help button on the bottom of the screen. On the left-hand side, click on this and a little help person will pop in and provide you your information you need to get back into the game. Now, if you're not signed into Landcarer and you're just watching it online, you can email questions or ask for support directly via email. Now, get a pen. The email address you need to send your questions or query to is HITHERE @Landcarer, LANDCARER.com.au. So hi there @Landcarer.com.au. But if you sign into Landcarer, you won't have to. Click the button on the left-hand corner for support or type your question into the text box at the bottom. But remember, this is an opportunity to talk to a leader in his space, someone who's got years of experience. And if you're looking at some new ideas or some new concepts, here's your chance to get a one-on-one with somebody who's done it. He's got the boots on the ground experience to actually show what he's up to and how he's doing it in a meaningful way. Over to you, Andrew, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks very much, Mick. And also thanks to Landcare Australia Limited and the federal government's National Landcare Program and the Bob Hawke Award for making this available, so that it interests farmers to apply for these awards, and then develops a really good connection between those farmers and others around the country. So thanks for the opportunity, and I'll now present our farm, Yan Yan Gurt West Farm, as we call it, a regenerative farming system. And I'm the 4th generation farmer. Our family came to this area in 1905, so we've been here for 116 years, and a lot has happened in that space over time. It's not a big farm. It's about a medium-sized farm in this area. It's about 575 acres. Often when we say we live in the northeastern foothills of the Otway Ranges, people say, oh, you must be getting 1,000 mil a year or 1,500 millimetres a year of rainfall. Well, that's not the case. The long-term average for our farm here in this Birregurra Deans Marsh district is about 640 mil a year. And from 1997 to 2010, that dry period, the average was around about 590 millimetres per year. So, it's a reasonable rainfall, but it's not particularly high in terms of the Otway Ranges. So moving on, the property here is just shown there where it's situated. We're about an hour and a half drive from Melbourne and down in the southern Victoria. So there are a lot of females on this farm, and my wife Jill there on the left, she and I co-manage this property. It's actually a family farm. I have a brother Hugh and sisters Jan and Elspeth are involved in the farm in different ways as well. But Jill and I and our family, we live on the farm and we operate the property. And the girl I have my arm around there is my youngest daughter, Christy. She did an agricultural science degree at La Trobe Uni, and she's interested in the farm. She works a day a week on the property and does other employment things as well. Then there's Hannah. She's our middle daughter. She studied zoology and animal behaviour, and she works a day a week on the property and also works on 2 other properties in the area. Then there's little Lyra there. She's Jill's and my granddaughter. She's a 6th generation to sit on this farm and live here. And next to her is her mother, Michelle. Michelle often doesn't like that photo because she's pregnant there with her 2nd child, but it was a photo where we're all together, so that's why we show it. But Michelle's the artist of the family. I think every family needs an artist, and she's on the farm too, and she's our artist, and her partner is involved in a beef farm not far away from here. And Jill, my wife, as I say, she and I co-manage this property, so we couldn't have achieved what we've done without Jill and the family support and the support of the extended family over a long period of time. So it's basically a sheep farm. It's prime lamb. It's a prime lamb operation. We join about 1,300 ewes per year, and sell prime lambs. Of course, we have now developed a self-replacing flock. We used to just buy in first cross ewes from a known source each year to reduce biological risk, but from a property that was making good genetic gain. But then we decided that when the girls were showing interest in the property, that we should develop a self-replacing flock, and so we're doing that now, and we're using composites. So what we've done is that we've selected the best of our first cross ewes, and we call those our elite ewes, and we've joined those with Highlanders to give us a first cross, and then we're putting a Lamb Pro over that cross and producing prime lambs, and we use White Suffolks as a terminal sire in this operation. So that's the way we run it here with our prime lamb operation, and we integrate agroforestry throughout the farm too to support the production of the property and enhance the environmental management, which is a key focus of what we do. In terms of lambing percentages, over the last couple of years we've been going well with the lambing percentages. Last year, our mature ewes, that is those aged from 2 years up to about 6 or 7 years, they averaged 152% as calculated from ewes joined. And this year we've just finished marking the mature ewes, those from 2 years old up to 7, and they've averaged 148%. And the ewe lambs, they're lambing at the moment. Last year they did 106%. We joined the ewe lambs at 8 months, and we lamb them down at about 13 months of age, and they're lambing right now. So that's what happens with our prime lamb and our percentages. One of the best things we did was in our infrastructure was to put in a set of bugle yards up at the woolshed, because sheep love running around in circles, and that really increased the efficiency of our operation greatly. And there's my wife Jill and our cousin there helping us with the scanning. We scan our ewes, and we scan for twins, those who are having singles and barons. We sell the barren ewes, and then we graze the twin bearing ewes in separate paddocks to the single bearing ewes. And we also have what we call a strategic grazing system, where we have a combination of set stocking, rotational grazing and autumn saving. So in April, hopefully when we get the rains, we put most of our ewes onto our neighbour's property. Now they have a property of about 90 acres and they don't have livestock, but we have an arrangement where we can graze that at various stages. And so we'll put most of the ewes over there and feed them hay made from the property, and also feed some oats. And the amount of oats we feed is determined by the hay test that we do on our hay in terms of its digestibility and protein content and NDF. So that's how we run our autumn saving program. They'll be over there for about 5 or 6 weeks. It allows our grass to grow and to get the leaf index area up to a point where it can be efficiently harvesting the solar energy during the autumn time. And then when we bring the sheep back, we then put them into their lambing paddocks, and we like to get the feed up to about 1,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare for the twin bearing ewes, and around about 1,000 or 1,100 for the single bearing ewes. And then we're confident that we've got enough feed to support those sheep throughout the lambing season. We will put some of our hay in the paddock just there for roughage, just put a hay in a bun, and that will stay there for a long time before they eat it down. And so that's the set stocking phase of our program when they're lambing, and then after lambing, and then when we wean them, we We then run them in larger mobs, the lambs in larger mobs and the ewes in larger mobs, and we do a rotational graze around the property. So that's what we call strategic grazing, a combination of autumn saving, set stocking and rotational grazing. We love to have shade on the farm, so you can see there's a native plantation we put in there quite some time ago, and I think that's pretty important for their health and well-being. And we like to shelter the lambs, of course, and you can see some of the trees there in the background that they've got smooth trunks because that's part of the agroforestry system that we have here. We integrate trees into our system that we can prune up for saw logs, and there's also a lot of understory in that plantation as well to stop the wind tunnelling and to provide biodiversity in the farming system. We do use alpacas to try and help fox predation, and but I don't think we get a lot of fox predation, although we have a lot of trees on the property. A lot of people say, well, okay, if you've planted so many trees, and we've taken the property from 3% woody vegetation in 1991 to 18% now, which is, you know, a lot of planting of about 50-odd thousand trees and shrubs. And we've had a lot of people saying, well, the lambing percentages will go down and you know, the foxes will come in and so on. Well, we found that our lambing percentages haven't gone down. In fact, the reverse has happened. We've probably taken our lambing percentages from 125 back in the early 90s up to the last 2 years. We've averaged 150 for the mature ewes. And actually, some research that comes out of Victoria has shown that when you analyse lamb deaths in this country here, that it's only a relatively small percentage which are predated by foxes. A lot of the fox predation is actually secondary predation, and that seems to be playing out on our property as well. So occasionally we will bring adjustment cattle in to graze any surplus grass in the spring and generate some cash flow and help us manage our pastures better. We love to fence out water holes, and we have 14 water holes on the property. We've fenced out 11 of them, and we make stock access points. We'll put troughs on them, and we're in the process of planning the fencing out of the remaining 3 water holes. We like to grow fodder crops, and there's plantain and clover there, protected by the plantation to reduce the incidence of the hot drying winds. But we're now going more into cover cropping. We're experimenting with that to bring more biodiversity into our pasture system, and that's what we're focusing on. One of our big things that we are doing is focusing on biodiversity in the system generally, because we feel that's important. When you consider what's happened to this farm since European settlement, how it was really cleared right down to about 3%, and that would have been completed by around about 1880 or 1890, and then we came in 1905. The place was pretty well cleared except for a bit of regrowth scrub and so on. I think, you know, our former farming systems have taken very much the reductionist approach, but what we want to do is bring the complexity back into the farming system, bring the biodiversity back into it to create opportunity and to create protection and to develop a robust and resilient landscape for the farming future. There's another example of some of the biodiverse plantings that we have on the property. Stock and land protection, there's the Pinus radiata plantation in the background for our superannuation. They're pruned up there and protecting a creek from erosion also. And on the left, you see some clear trunk trees there with some of the eucalypts being pruned for saw logs, and a lot of understory in there as well. And these trees provide a lot of shade and shelter and protection for the property. But the farm wasn't always like the photos you've just seen. In fact, these are some of the issues. These next 4 slides show what actually the property was like back in the 1980s. Water quality and erosion was an issue, tunnel erosion, stream bank erosion and gully erosion, eutrophication and so on, exposure, lack of biodiversity and vegetation, and exposing the property to wind erosion. Our soils here, they're fine sandy clay loams. So in some parts of the property, they're quite light. They're duplex soils. The fine sandy clay loam overlays a medium clay, which tends to be impervious. But, you know, if you have your pasture percentage down too low, it will blow like this, and that's been a problem. So we've got to watch that. Waterlogging and lack of land class subdivision was another issue on the property. One of these early photos showing it there. And also salting, not a lot of salting, but salting certainly was increasing in the farm. And also exposure, when you have a single tree and it just is exposed and the stock tend to concentrate around there, and the insects attack it, and it suffers from dieback and roots being compacted and so on. So these are all the sorts of issues we faced. So we developed a whole farm plan, and that's what's been driving us. In fact, some of the other reasons for us developing a whole farm plan and taking a new approach is that we did try to sell the property back in the in 1989, didn't sell. So we decided that if we're going to stay here, we need to address the natural resource decline on the property. And my father had started planting trees in the early days in about 1967. He was starting to plant natives. It was hard then because there weren't the nurseries and there weren't the Landcare groups like we have now. But he and his friend Lester Bush, they persevered and bought trees from the Natural Resource Conservation League, and they were keen to have trees on the property for shade and shelter for the sheep and birds. They love birds. So that was a driving factor. Our father had shown the way, and we started to expand on that theme to develop a greater plantation complex. And then our friend Rowan Reid, he lived, he bought a property there. He bought a property in 1987, and he started to experiment and develop ideas of revegetating his property using agroforestry principles. So we became friendly then in 1987. We're still great friends and involved in joint presentations and doing all sorts of different things in extension of agroforestry and landcare. So that was another driving force for our change. The other was we joined the local Landcare group as Landcare kicked off in Victoria in about 1986. So we became active members. So all those things came together, and so it seemed that what we needed to do was to develop a whole farm plan, bring in the ideas, and get cracking on a new way forward. So here's some before and after photos. 1994 of the Yan Yan Gur Creek there. We have highly erodible soils here. They're, as I say, these duplex soils, but they're quite dispersive, and when they become waterlogged and overcleared and overstocked, they tend to erode and wash down there to the Barwon River and out to the sea. So here we have an aftershot there taken 9 years later, and there's a result with a plantain and clover crop down there as well. Another one here, the Yan Yan Gur Creek, before shot in 1994. In fact, in these landscapes, there weren't any creeks on our farm. They were just wetlands and swamps and Aboriginal hunting grounds. And then when the overclearing occurred and then the swamps even got wetter and higher in water level, the original stock started dying of pleurisy. So the early settlers drained these swamps, and then that developed this erosion pattern. And in one part of the farm, that creek is actually 30 metres deep. So there's a lot of topsoil that's moved off. So we're trying to reverse that. And there's a shot taken 5 years later. And you can see some of the trees are pruned there, and they're pruned there for their agroforestry potential and saw log, for furniture making and other uses. And we like to have a lot of biodiversity in these plantings, so we've got things flowering in each month of the year. That's the plan, and then using trees that are going to help reduce the erosion, such as blackwoods, which have a sort of a nice fibrous root structure, and if the soil softs off, it'll send up a new shoot. So thinking about the types of trees that we plant there to bring back the complexity into the system to try and reverse the natural resource-based decline on this property. And that's what it's like today. You see some of those trees have been high pruned to about 6 or 7 metres. Potential soil log for us for another product coming off the farm. So this shot here shows some of the land class subdivision that we've done on the property. We've divided the property up into 5 land class subdivisions, and and we have fine sandy clay loam steep, and we have fine sandy clay loam flat. We have heavy clay earths. We have salt affected areas as well, and we have loamy soils undulating. So the trees there and the top there, the blue gums they are demarking the Landcare subdivision from the fine sandy clay loam flat to the fine sandy clay loam steep. And then as you move your eyes further down, it's hard. I haven't got a pointer here to show you. Is that pointer working there when I do that? Don't know whether it is or not. Is that pointer?
Yes,
that
mate,
pointer?
it is.
Oh, it is, okay. So there's the blue gums there demarking the flat to the steep. It doesn't look steep, it's quite steep there. And down the break of slope here, we've planted trees there. Now, those trees, whilst they're doing a Landcare subdivision, they're also commercial trees for blue gums. They were planted in 1993, harvested in 2007, and we got a cash return. And this is actually the coppice regrowth. So it's sort of like a sustainable forestry system built into the farming system to provide those values. Up here we have what we call our direct seeded site. These trees were dying due to dieback, and we direct seeded 19 species of trees up there, and it provides fantastic shelter for our lambing ewes up in this back place at the moment. The ewe lambs there now, and they all go up here to lamb, and they just love it up there. And we've also have collaboration with our neighbours through the Yanyangur Creek catchment plan, of which we've been members of over the last 30 years. Our neighbours here, they've got plantings along the Yanyangur Creek like we have, but up here on their highly eroded bank here, they put blue gums, and that was a commercial operation to stop the erosion and to provide an income, and they were harvested in 2007. That's a coppice regrowth. And over here is actually our neighbour is Gillon McLaughlin, the CEO of the AFL. He's got some blue gums up there. And our cousins here have done a lot of plantings down there in their gullies as well. So this is all collaboration in the in the Yanyangur Creek catchment plan, supported by the Otway Forestry Network and the local East Otway Landcare Group. So there's another shot here showing some Landcare subdivision where we have the blue gums here demarking the heavy clay earth to the fine sandy clay loam, well drained up here. There's some pines here for our superannuation, obviating gully erosion there, and up here we've got some more blue gums for commercial activity, and here we've got some biodiverse plantings. Along the Yanyangur Creek, they're all biodiverse mixed plantings snaking right through along the creek there through this system. We like to fence our dams out, as I was saying. There's one there that's been fenced out, stock access point here, and up here we've got she oaks that we are pruning for saw logs and turning timber, and blackwoods, and some bush foods in here as well with mountain pepper there that we can harvest. Another before and after shot shows you the blue gums there, and then they were harvested, but they grow back, and then here they are today. So we have a bit of salting down there, which is a classic salt discharge site, and we've developed this program here to obviate that. So down here we've got all the salt tolerant species. We've fenced the area out. It used to be just one big paddock all the way through here of about 150 odd acres, I suppose, and there were no fences there. So putting the laneway system has been really good, and then revegetating that, as you see there, and connecting that revegetation with the Yanyangur Creek revegetation as well. This forms an environmental node, which is quite rich in terms of its bird species. We've been involved in a bird survey program with the Otway Forestry Network and the Upper Barwon Landcare Network, and our bird spotter came along, identified 16 species in there. So that's become quite significant. And one of the big advantages here, I think, looking at this slide, this was sort of taken in probably February, very dry, is the cooling effect that the trees have on our property. So you can see there that as the wind blows across here, we get the northwesterly winds, how it would cool the property, not only through evapotranspiration cooling, but providing shade as well for the livestock. And so in a sense, you know, the trees, they're like air conditioners. That's the way we think about them. They're like air conditioners. They're cooling the landscape down. but they also keep the landscape warm in the winter, because if you can reduce the wind speed by 20 or 30 kilometres an hour, you can actually have a big effect on the chill factor that the newborn lambs are subjected to. In fact, the chill factor that newborn lambs and calves are subjected to is a proportion of the square of the wind speed. So cutting the wind speed down by 20 kilometres an hour can have a big impact on making the farm warmer, as the way that those young livestock would feel it. And so we can have warming and cooling using trees to warm and cool the property. And then down, this is at the same site with a closer look inside, so that this area has now become a stock haven off shears. This particular time in early December, the weather came in bad after shearing. We put the sheep down there for 48 hours. They had feed, water, and very good shelter, and we didn't lose any. There's also an opportunity here, because we put the laneway system along the slightly higher part of this landscape, so it's well drained and we can run stock and vehicles. It means that the salt affected area down here, the breaker slope, starts about there. So there's a little opportunity here with this raised land to have trees for saw logs. So that's like a niche of opportunity for yellow stringy barks, which are great for growing for poles for construction, because the lictospora won't eat the sapwood. So that's a niche of opportunity there, and good protection for the livestock, and environmental node, and it beautifies the property. And there's a close-up of the stringy barks managed for saw logs. Another before and after. This is the shot that we saw from the aerial photograph of the direct seeded site, and there's the Greening Australia direct seeding machine, and that's how we seeded that particular site, and that's what it's like today. We've got a drop-down fence here, so when it gets really hot, we can allow the stock to go in there, but there's a lot of shade and shelter from that particular planting. So here's the style of plant that we like to have now. So this particular plantation is along a land class subdivision boundary, and so we've got spotted gums here on the outside. We're pruning up for saw logs at about 6 metre spacings, understory, then spotted gums at about 7 metre spacings, because they're under more competition in the middle, understory, and then spotted gums again. So it's a mixed plantation and providing multiple values to the property. So in essence, what we've really done is that we've looked at the property of the whole farm plan. We've fenced out all the creek lines and revegetated them. We've fenced out the drainage lines and revegetated those. We've fenced out the waterlogged areas, the salt-affected areas, the remnant vegetation areas, and we fenced out the dams, and we've hooked all those up into a web of connected trees across the property to provide wildlife corridor carriage, shade and shelter, pollination. We have, honey as well, and the multiple values that we have from the trees in terms of keeping the farm cool in the summer but warmer in the winter, and that's a great advantage for our farm. In fact, we now have an interface of 23 kilometres of trees to pasture, so that gives us tremendous scope for getting that cooling and warming effect from that complexity of trees, and building up the complexity of the farm rather than looking at farming as a reductionist experience. So here we have another before and after. This is what we call our Banksia site. This is this dam up here was highly eroded, and it was being eutrophied by the cattle, and so we decided to fence it out. And we have, with our Otway Agroforestry Network, we have a site visit and peer group mentoring program, and I'm involved in it. In fact, Rowan Reid and myself started off the Otway Agroforestry Network in 1993, and we still participate and work with it. And so we had a site visit from some of our Otway Network members, and our family members as well. Particularly my brother was very involved in this, and we had we developed a site here where we fenced out about nearly a hectare, just under a hectare, and put in Banksias there, 28 of Australia's 74 species of Banksias. It's turned into a bit of a food forest. There's, brothers put in lemons, and there's also some, there's nut trees, there's fig trees, there's olive trees, and there are other trees there as well. So it's become a bit of a food forest, and with our Otwager Forestry Network, we try to encourage our members to integrate bush foods into their farming systems where they can. So this is an example here where we've integrated river mint down the bottom, because when we had the dam cleaned out before fencing, we made a little swale down the bottom there. That becomes a nice moisture trap for the native river mint, the Mentha australis, and we've also got a bit of roundleaf river mint there as well. And there's some lily pillies there also in that planting. And so we've put a trough system on there so that the stock now get better water, higher quality water, well filtered. There's a lot of birds up there. It's a lovely sense of place for the family, for the not only for the well-being of the birds and the frogs that are living there, but the people that participate in the landscape. And we really love going up there. And my wife now, she's developed that into a commercial enterprise, and she picks flowers each week. And last week she took flowers up to florists in Colac, and she has about 5 outlets, and it's become quite a good little earner for the farm, and a nice activity to be involved with. We love having birds on the place, and we now have 120 bird species that have been identified on the property, and we've done some bird analysis on the different vegetation classes across the farm, so getting a lot of bird life happening here. And we have a seed orchard of sugar gum and spotted gum, which are also set up for shelter and shade for livestock. And this has been an orchard to grow seed commercially. We haven't sold a lot of seed. We have sold some. The trees that are the poorer producers, we fell those. They become firewood, or they become timber for construction, such as poles for construction, or making even making a kindergarten playground that was made using that timber. We have a stock containment paddock if we need it, which is well and low in the landscape on heavy soils, surrounded by trees. We haven't had to use it lately, but it's there if necessary. In terms of the farm products, really, since we've taken our place from 3% to 18% woody vegetation, we haven't reduced the number of lambs and the amount of wool that we produce. We're still producing about the same that we were 30 years ago, but we've got, a lot more vegetation and other opportunities on the property with that. So, yeah, we turn off, 1,500 to 1,800 head. This year we've produced, we've just done the additions, we've produced 1,810 lambs this year. Last year was 1,830. And so that's what we've been producing for a long period of time. But now we're also producing this on top of that. And this shows what's actually growing in terms of the commercial timber. The softwood saw logs there, they're growing at 38 tonnes a year. Hardwood saw logs growing at 50 tonnes a year. Hardwood pulp logs growing at 120. And so, we're turning off we're not turning off, we're growing these trees into about just a bit over 200 green tonnes per year, and that's sequestering carbon. Every tree sequesters carbon and provides habitat. And so it's not that we're harvesting that amount each year, that's what's growing, and we can choose to harvest the different types of trees there for different commercial products at our time of choosing. It's not like livestock when the animal's in prime condition, you've got to sell them. With the trees, you have far more flexibility with selling stock when you have a bad year on the farm, or maybe you get in there and sell some timber, for example. So you have that flexibility. So consequently, when you put this together, that's now our total production. So by definition, and looking at that information now, you can see that our farm is now more productive than what it was before we had the tree project fired up on this farm. And you can see down the bottom there's also, we've sold little logs for shiitake mushroom growing, and we have sold a little bit of bush food, but only a very small amount. We even sold some Christmas trees as thinnings of the pine plantation back in the early days, which the thinnings then paid for the fencing and the trees. We do tours on the farm. I'll just have a sip of water. we do a lot of tours for schools, secondary, primary, tertiary, universities, etc. And we run ecotourism and develop education programs with various institutions such as Melbourne University, Agroforestry Unit, and William Angliss Food College in Melbourne, who are connecting food with landscape, and we're running programs with them. We've also just started a program with Monash University, their architecture students who are doing a landscape architecture unit, and they've been involved in doing some design work on our property, and we're working with them right now. But one thing, I'll just finish up with these last couple of slides, Mick, and then there might be some questions or whatever. But so looking here, this is actually the Yanyangur Creek catchment. It's 2,000 hectares, and the Yanyangur Creek runs, from the Boona Hills up here, the forest right down through the middle of the catchment down to the Barwon River. But our property sits bang in the middle. That's our farm. In fact, those colours there, incidentally, I didn't have the land class slide up. All those colours indicate the different land class subdivisions, from the fine sandy clay loam flat, fine sandy clay loam steep, salt affected area, undulating loam there, more undulating loam, salt affected, heavy clay earth here and heavy clay earth there, and fine sandy clay loam undulating there. So they're the different land classes. Anyway, that's where our farm sits. So since we joined Landcare back in 1986, we've always been conscious of where our farm sits in the catchment, and we think that's been important. So we've worked with the farmers and the Otway Agroforestry Network and the East Otway Landcare Group to revegetate this catchment and develop a wildlife corridor linkage from the Boona Hills right down to the Barwon River. And there are a couple of slides here. Well, this slide here shows a picture. Our farm is in the central part here, but it's also on the perimeters here. There's probably about another 5 farms. It's probably about 6 farms in this photo, showing how the Yanyangur Creek catchment looks like today. If we took that photo 30 years ago, it would be, about 3% woody vegetation. And this slide here, well, parts of this slide here would be up to over 20%, and some would be around 18%, like over most of our farm. So you can see the diversity of different farmers and different people planting in different styles, but in a mosaic of space and time, you come up with a more complex landscape, a more protected landscape, a more robust and resilient landscape in the face of climate change. The allowance of pollen and DNA to travel longitudinally and laterally across the landscape to give us resilience in the view of climate change, so that we can have pollen, DNA moving right through these landscapes, so we get better adaptation and take away isolate plantings which are not connected and getting inbreeding depression. So building the complexity brings in the biodiversity, the economic opportunity, the increased agricultural opportunity, production systems, and a better place to live, not only for the animals but for the people. Better well-being for the people. And the interesting thing about all this is that when we started our planting back in the early 90s, we weren't really thinking about carbon sequestration. In fact, there was only probably a few erudite people who were, although I had studied it at school about the greenhouse effect, but didn't ever really connect that with our farm at that time. So we were planting for all the reasons of improving the agricultural productivity, addressing the environmental issues, the erosion, the salinity, the water logging, and bringing back the biodiversity and bringing back the birds. We were planting for all those reasons to make it a better place to live, to give us better mental health as well. But the byproduct of that is that the government gets carbon sequestration as well, and we get carbon sequestration. So we have another product to sell. So that's like a hidden benefit that has come out of this system. So with national schemes, let's not just think about singly planting for carbon, but think about planting for a multitude of things, as I've demonstrated in this presentation. Plant for all the reasons that are at the heart of the farmer and the community, of the things that they want. and you'll come up with a more diverse planting system and multiple values coming out of that system, but you will still get carbon sequestration. So, we don't want to just be picking winners about planting for salinity or planting just for biodiversity one year and planting for carbon another year or whatever. Let's plant for all these production issues, bringing carbon back into the system, improving the carbon in the soil and building up its moisture holding capacity and nutrient cycling and so on. Plant for those reasons. And the side benefits will be carbon sequestration, a better community resource, better for tourism if we can get back into tourism, and better overall just for the health and for the youth to inspire young people to become involved. One of the things that we're really passionate about, and it's something that Rowan Reid set out to do and has been successful on his property, only 3 kilometres from us on his Bamboo agroforestry farm, is to think about making farming attractive to farmers. And we say in our family to make farming attractive to young people. Let's bring young people back into the community. Let's bring young people back into farming. Let's excite them about farming, the opportunities. Our daughter now, she buys lambs off us and value adds, and she sells the farm story to sell her sheep, for example. So, think about a lot of the other areas of biodiversity that can be really advantageous in these landscapes: honey production and so on, flower production, saw logs, livestock, different types of livestock. Once you start to get the timber coming on stream, well then, we can set up some small mills and value adding and develop a community of activity. In fact, on the timber, Australia has a $2 billion trade deficit in timber. Yet most of our agricultural production systems, we are surplus producers of agricultural products. Think of, wool, probably about 80-90%, beef, wheat, similar. We're surplus producers of agricultural products. But when it comes to timber, we are net importers. Now, we've got the land crying out for trees to come up with a more diverse, complex farming system to protect and give the opportunities. We need the trees and the shrubs in the farming landscape. Let's manage just some of those for timber, and then we don't need to import timber from the equatorial belt where they don't have regulations and so on. We're closing up native forests. Where are we going to get our timber? The framing for house timber has skyrocketed now. We should be growing timber on our farms in these integrated agroforestry systems, which also have biodiversity and connectedness. So there's a web of trees. That was a booklet produced describing what happened on the Yanyangur Creek catchment program. Vegetative cover went from 6% to 23% over a 28-year period. The riparian vegetation went from 1.5 kilometres to 18 kilometres, the wildlife corridor. Timber production went from 3% to 13 hectares to 250 hectares there. So that's just our farm brochure. There's some of the education programs that we've been involved with. And the Master Tree Grower program has been a great project that Rowan Reid developed out of Melbourne University, and that we came on board with that, and we've been involved with it ever since, been going since 1996, and it's been great going around Australia. It's been 120 odd programs around Australia, exciting farmers about tree growing from their perspective, and put the farm at the centre of the decision making, let them make the decisions about what sort of trees they want to put on their place, what sort of issues they have, and support them with groups like the Master Tree Grower program and running those programs and courses. And so this is the last slide here, Mick, and this slide just demonstrates how that looks like one farm. It's actually two. In fact, the up here, you can see that fence there. That's the fence between us and our neighbours. That's a neighbour who has the 90 acres where we place our sheep there for autumn saving. But the point of this slide is that it demonstrates how you can have the wildlife corridor, connecting, using the vegetation to connect farmers and farms, and have that going right through the 18 kilometres of the Yanyangur Creek, which it is today. That's an example of it. There's one farm there, moves into the next farm in a seamless phase like that. It's still a wildlife corridor. So, it's a great way to connect with neighbours using the vegetation, I think that's a good example of the sort of landscape change we're looking at. So I'll call it there, Mick. I think I've said enough.
Mate, that was absolutely fabulous. And if there's ever anyone in what a good, sustainable-looking farming business looks like, you've just seen it, folks. There's a couple of questions that have come in, and I guess coming from my area have been in the previous days have been in the pasture space. One of the questions we've had come in, Andrew, is there any fertiliser, either chemical or otherwise, used on the property to create those pastures that you're growing and managing?
Yeah, we've taken a traditional agronomic approach to our pastures over many years, regular soil testing and providing super and potash. Nitrogen, we've hardly ever applied nitrogen or became aware of the significance of nitrous oxide as a damaging greenhouse gas, so we haven't used nitrogen at all in that sense on pastures. Or maybe 25 years ago we did, but since we started this project, no. We don't use as much fertiliser as we used to. I think our grazing system is different as well. We're certainly looking at going down the regenerative way in terms of pasture cropping and seeing if we can increase the biodiversity in the pasture and getting some more carbon sequestration with deeper rooted species such as daikon radish and chicory and things like that. And so trying to build up our biodiversity in the pasture and the biodiversity in the soil. We think we've come a long way, the biodiversity above the soil with the trees and the shrubs, but now we're looking at the biodiversity in our pasture systems, and the soils is our next frontier, and our daughters are very keen, and they're exploring different methodologies in that right now.
Excellent answer. Now another question we have, it's I'll try. I think I've worked out. So Gordon's put up a question saying you're using this very strategic grazing plan rather than the usual heavy grazing with long rest, which is a lot of the common one that Regen guys are doing. The use of heavy grazing short term, sort of for 3 days with long rest. When you're taking your approaches are more strategic, grazing at the 3 leaf stage, I guess, and hitting the grass where it is in the landscape at the time. Have you got a comment on how you're managing that pressure over time or moving around? Because I know the Regen guys do have a graze and move quite regularly in the long rest. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, we've never tried that, but not to say that we won't try it. Our daughters might like to try that too. So I can't really comment much on that grazing style because we haven't done it. But I do know that when we do our autumn saving, it certainly is very significant in terms of the amount of solar energy we can capture using that phase, and that seems to tie us over our winter period. And the pastures seem to survive that the set stocking over lambing. I don't know how they go with the long rest, how you go with the clover, because here we rely on clover to drive our system in terms of its high protein content and high digestibility. But when you get into having longer pastures, the clovers often go out. So that's, I guess, there are pros and cons for all systems. So that's something I'd throw back to that sort of grazing system.
Yep, excellent answer. Excellent. Now, one of the things that sort of strikes me, which I love, and I guess coming from my background, the trees in the landscape, for I think the term, you've got a timber resource there. You've got a soil water pump, for water tables and things like that. You've got a lot of like environmental engineering opportunity with those trees. It's the first time. I think what I like about the presentation today is that you're fencing to land types is a big thing that's pushed particularly in the north, but fencing to or planting to land types, I haven't seen it done in such scale before, and I think the value of it, that there's a common perception in the landscape that biodiversity is locked up and forgotten, that renewable ability of the forest to regenerate soil logs and food products and pollination and all that is often missed. Moving to that sort of pre-European style approach to biodiversity. There's some research was done a few years ago now by MLA about the wind shear and the evaporation and the microclimates associated with these tree belts. And obviously the flow onto production from that. Have you noticed, you mentioned a few times that particularly in some of those sandy paddocks, that one of the photos you put up, you could see the wind wouldn't have the ability to get that speed up. Is there any other benefits that you can sort of really point to in the length of growth season and things like that for pasture? Obviously the lambing's protected, but have you noticed that in your soil and ultimately, in your pasture, which would ultimately become a soil and a soil carbon thing, that longer growth period protection from frosts and wind shear and things like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't be objective about that because there's so many variables involved in that question, but it is a good question. It's something that we really should be researching holistic farm systems, to try and come up with answers to those questions. But I mean, the science is well there for in crops and also pasture growth, how you can end up with more pasture growth if it's properly protected by shelter belts. You do have a competition zone, of course, but that can be managed as well, because in wet years like this, for example, around the trees, we could always traffic around our farm instead of getting bogged, and the stock have a nice dry place to rest on. But I guess that if we're producing a similar amount of agricultural produce, although we've got 18%, it probably stands to reason that we're probably getting more pasture growing in the areas where it's growing as well to compensate for that. And I guess that would be evident in what we're producing on the farm. And of course, we know that we're getting tremendous wind protection because we've got 23-kilometre interface of pasture to trees, so that the quiet zone for the plantation where the wind drops the most is about 5 or 6 tree heights out from the plantation. You often see stock lying out there. They've picked it up, or when we used to use horse all the time, right around there, you'd feel it yourself. So that's where you're getting far better protection there, and the grass is not getting blown around as much. The moisture content over time would be greater at that particular point. The humidity would be greater because of less evapotranspiration, and therefore you get more growth. I've seen, in our plantain crop, you get out about 3 or 4 tree heights, and there's tremendous growth there compared to as you move closer. And then of course you've got the competition zone. So there's a lot of variables in there, but overall the system seems to work for us.
Excellent. Now, one of the other things that we sort of talk about there, like to get into that mindset where you've done that, some of those earlier photos you had of the before and after, man, they're striking. One of the questions I was going to ask you was, what's the thing you love about what you're doing in this space? But I think standing on that hill, looking down the valley over 10, 15, 20, 30 years to the superannuation plot, I think I could probably answer that. It's pretty impressive to see that. As a producer who's looking at this, if you had 3 things to say to them, like if you're standing in that paddock today looking down that same gully and you don't have the trees there and you've got the same problems and you're wanting to know what's the way forward, is there a book, is there a group, is there a network, is there an opportunity where they can start their thinking? Over the last couple of years, I've spoken to lots of producers and asked them about their, what I call the road to Damascus moment, what made them change what they were doing. And sometimes it was in a drought or something had happened or just struggling to get by another season and they wanted to change something. So what's your advice to these guys? What would I do? I came home, I noticed you mentioned you had property maps. I'm still surprised by how many people don't. Is there a tool? Is there a book? Is there a training platform? Is there something or some things that you would recommend for producers to go and have a start scratching around in the dirt and see where they want to go?
I guess that one thing is, from a philosophical perspective, is to be consistent and persistent. Once you set a goal, I didn't show it today, but we had a mission statement. We sat down and worked out what do we actually want to achieve. So we developed a mission statement so that it gives you something to aim for, and then you can tick things off as you go. And in order to achieve that, we thought, well, if we want to achieve this mission statement, we need to have a plan, and a whole farm plan is an obvious starting point. And then we took sort of copies of this plan when we were going around to the various farmer groups we'd go to when Landcare was coming on. I'd take this map around with me and talk to someone who knew a lot about understory and biodiversity. What would you plant here? What you plant there? End up with these. Still got them. These big spreadsheets with notes all over them, and then spoke to the soil conservation guys and said, well, you know, what would be a good idea? How can we sort of manage this section here? And what about go to the salting guys, you know, in the department as they were then, and come up with these maps. And then, you know, the agroforestry with Rowan Reed next door there, we went over there and talked to him. We've formed the Otway Agroforest Network, and the Otway Agroforest Network has informed a lot of our work over time, as has the East Otway Landcare Group. Getting back to Landcare, I mean, this program is run by Landcare Australia Limited. We've had a lot of input from Landcare into our property management when we were going around to the Landcare events, like, you know, and I'd take them out there and would talk to anyone who had a bit of experience in some of the things we were looking at, and came up with this whole series of diagrams and sit down and synthesise that and bring it into a map that would make some sense. And I suppose drawing on our experience over time about running stock, where we want to put laneways and things like that, because I spent many years riding around the property on a horse, and you work out where things should go just through experience and bringing your own experience and the family, extended family experience into it as well. So just be prepared to throw the net out very widely and just capture as much information as possible, and then you synthesise that and come up with a plan. And I think that, you know, like a hidden benefit that's come out of all of this has certainly been the carbon sequestration. But the other is about the way it's impacting on our family, keeping our family together. We sort of developed a family philosophy around our mission statement as well about this re-veg. We've been having family and friends tree planting days for the last 27 years. In 2019, we had 74 people here planting trees. A lot of people like to get out of the city and plant a tree. They're pent up. They want to do something, and we'll give them the opportunity, you know, and come out and enjoy the social aspect of it. Now, make it a social thing and make the farm enjoyable. And now we've got our 3 daughters all living here, involved in different ways. You know, that's we find that like, I guess is a hidden benefit about the impact it's had on keeping our family together and doing things together and enjoying a variety of activities. So you don't get stale. You know, you can do different things. If you're creating a more complex farming system, it creates opportunity for other people to be involved, and, you know, maybe, you know, you can lease land to tack on to what you've got and this sort of thing as well.
All right, excellent answer. Look, we've just ticked over the hour mark, so we've got a couple more questions. What I might do with those questions is write them in an email and get Andrew and I will flick it back between us, and we'll put them up on Landcarer when this webinar goes live. That's a fabulous way to wrap the whole meeting up today, Andrew. The ability to make farming and family centre of what you're doing, to make it fun. I think that we miss that. I listen to, particularly over the last few years, I'm listening to webinars and podcasts all the time, and it's all about the burden and the troubles and the productivity and the science. But you've just outlaid a really good demonstration of a farm that's probably hitting in the top percentage of lambing. You've got an extra couple of incomes. You've increased the percentage of your vegetation and your biodiversity plantings, and you've got multiple income streams. I think for a key message to take away from this webinar, if you're listening today, is that is pretty much what Landcare's core values has been for 30 years. It's been, you know, having family in the community on farm and working together. And the point you made, Andrew, about having making it fun and getting people out, I mean, that is basically at the very epicenter of what Landcare does. It's great to hear such a positive story, and it's great to finally meet you or to talk to you. I haven't met you in person yet, obviously, but I think this has been an absolutely wonderful opportunity, and I thank you very much for your time. I will put sometime this afternoon or early on Monday, this webinar will go live, and there'll be a couple of extra questions tied up on the Landcarer website. So I'd first just like to thank Andrew for participating today. From my perspective, it's been absolutely fabulous to see the things that I've been speaking about for so many years all in one place happening at once. And it's really encouraging to see that, particularly coming into the last couple of years where there's been so much emphasis on carbon plantings and natural capital and landscape and regenerative this and that. This is at the very roots of what Landcare's been doing for a long time, is repairing and managing landscapes and bringing the community along. So if you're interested in what you've seen today, or you're interested in being involved or participating in these sort of projects, I really strongly encourage you to reach out to Landcare Farming and have a chat, because this is our core business and we'd love to work you in that space. And I definitely want to do some more work with you, Andrew, so we'll be in touch after this. Thank you very much for your time today and sharing your journey and your story. Thank you to the people who've dialed in and listened today. Very much thank you for your support. And also thank you to the National Landcare Program for being funded by the Australian Government. And thank you to the tech guys who had to pull this together in a very short time when our two other speakers disappeared over the horizon. So thank you, everyone. Have a good day, and we'll speak soon. Good afternoon.
Okay, thanks, Mick.